The wind had always whispered through the pines that bordered Eli Mercer's ranch, but in recent years it had begun to sound less like nature and more like ghosts, the kind that didn't rattle chains or slam doors, but the kind that lived in memories, heavy and unrelenting. Eli had lived alone for 9 winters now. The last sound of laughter inside his house had died with the fever that took his wife and daughter in the same cold week. He never sold the child's cradle, never moved Mary's worn apron from its hook by the stove. The house was too quiet, and yet too full of absence to ever be still. He spoke to the animals more than he spoke to people. Not that he minded. Folk from town had stopped visiting after the funeral, when he'd turned to whiskey and fists to cope. He wasn't proud of that year, or the one after, but the land didn't judge, and the cattle didn't care if your eyes were bloodshot, so long as you fed them. At 51, Eli's back ached more than it used to. His right knee stiffened like rust in the mornings, and lifting hay bales no longer felt like just work. It felt like penance. He told himself he was keeping the ranch alive because it was what Mary would have wanted. Truth was, it gave him a reason to keep breathing. But the winter before had been rough. 3 cows dead, 1 barn beam cracked in a windstorm, and a tendon torn in his shoulder from falling off the corral gate. He didn't ask for help, didn't trust it. Too many times help came with judgment, or pity, or debt. So, when Marv Jensen, the grocer in town, mentioned a woman looking for work, Eli didn't even ask her name. "Send her up," he muttered, tossing another sack of feed into the back of his wagon. Barn's filthy. The morning she arrived, frost still clung to the grass like the last breath of the night refusing to die. Eli didn't know what he expected. Probably some half-starved girl with too much lipstick and not enough grit. What he got was a woman maybe 30, with hollow cheeks, strong hands, and the posture of someone who knew what it meant to carry weight no one could see. She didn't smile when he greeted her, just nodded and walked toward the barn like she'd done it 1,000 times. Her boots were worn but quiet on the dirt, and she moved like someone who didn't want to be noticed. Eli respected that. He didn't offer small talk. She didn't ask for it. From the porch, he watched her work, saw how she rolled up her sleeves with practiced efficiency, how her fingers moved through hay and splintered wood like muscle memory. It stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years, an old ache, the kind that came not from longing, but from remembering you used to. He meant to leave her be. That was the deal. A day's work for a few coins and a meal, no questions asked. But around noon, when he saw her pause at the barn door and glance toward the woods, back tense, eyes wide, he noticed. Not curiosity, not caution, that was fear. It was in the way she held herself, like her ribs were bracing for impact, like a woman waiting for the world to hit her again. That moment sat like a stone in Eli's gut. He knew fear, had seen it in his wife's eyes when the fever got worse, when the doctor didn't come in time. He'd held his child's body until it went cold, and the way Mary looked at him that day, like maybe he should have done more, been more, had haunted him ever since. Fear didn't always come with screams. Sometimes it lived in silence. Sometimes it looked like a woman with strong arms scrubbing your barn floor too fast. That evening, when the sun dipped low and cast golden light through the broken barn slats, he walked down with a plate of cornbread and a tin cup of coffee. It was a courtesy, nothing more. But when he knocked softly on the side door, what answered him wasn't her voice. It was a child's cry. Faint, muffled, fragile. He froze, heart stuttering, hand still on the doorknob, and then another small whimper. A sound so thin it could have been a kitten, if not for the tremble in it that clawed at something deep inside him. He pushed the door open, and there she was. Clara, if that was her real name, stood like a deer in a trap, lips parted, eyes wild. Behind her, huddled in a corner near a pile of old blankets, were 4 children, dirty, tired, and afraid. The oldest, maybe 10, glared at him with a kind of courage only desperation gives. The youngest didn't even lift his head. Eli's breath caught. The tin cup in his hand tilted slightly, sending hot coffee dripping down his wrist, but he didn't notice. She raised both hands slowly, like she was bracing for him to shout, or worse. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, just didn't know when. The weight of it all settled between them like a third presence in the room. Eli could have turned around, could have told her to get off his land, could have reminded himself that nothing good ever came from inviting strangers in. But he didn't, because in that moment, watching her body positioned between him and the children like a shield, he remembered the way Mary used to do the same, even when she was sick, even when death was already in the house. Eli Mercer, the man who hadn't shared a meal with another soul in years, opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come yet. All he knew was the ache in his chest was no longer just his. The days that followed moved slowly, like winter sap crawling through bark. Eli Mercer didn't speak much. He never had. But now his silences felt different. Not empty, not angry, just watchful. Like he was trying to figure out where this strange woman and her 4 children fit into the space he had kept so meticulously hollow for almost a decade. Clara tried to stay out of the house. She slept with the children in the old bunkhouse, a drafty, half-rotted structure that once housed ranch hands, back when Eli still employed them. Now it was little more than walls and a roof, but to Clara, it was sanctuary. Each morning, before the sun burned away the frost, she was already working, feeding chickens, breaking ice in the trough, sweeping out the barns again, even though they were already clean. Eli didn't tell her to do any of it. He just noticed it was done, and that she never asked for anything in return. The children were quiet, too. The girl, Elsie, was the oldest, barely 10, but already with a mother's hands. She kept the others, Ben, Matthew, and baby Ruth, fed, clean, and quiet. Always quiet, like noise was a luxury they couldn't afford. Eli brought them stew one night, set it down on the porch, and walked away before Clara opened the door. The next morning, the pot was cleaned and placed gently on the steps. A thank you was scratched into the dirt beside it. No words, just signs. But sometimes signs spoke louder. He didn't ask about her past, not yet. He figured she'd tell him when she was ready. Still, the signs were there. The way her eyes darted toward the horizon at sunset. The way the kids flinched at the sound of hooves. The way Clara never let her back face the door. One night, the storm rolled in fast and mean. Lightning cracking open the black sky like God himself was angry. Eli sat by the fire in his kitchen, the wind howling past the windows, when he saw movement out back. He opened the door. Clara was there, soaked, barefoot, holding baby Ruth wrapped in an old quilt. The bunkhouse had lost part of its roof. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know where else to go." Eli didn't speak. He stepped aside. They filed in one by one, wet, shivering, small. Clara stood last, hesitating like it was a trap. "I got dry blankets," Eli said, nodding toward the old cedar chest. She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped inside. That night, the house was full, for the first time in nearly a decade. The fireplace popped and hissed. The children fell asleep one by one on the floor. Clara sat in the far corner, rocking Ruth, her face half lit by firelight. Eli watched her, remembering how Mary used to hold their daughter the same way, swaying without rhythm, a private kind of lullaby in her bones. Something broke open inside him, not loud, not painful, just soft, like frost melting under sun. "Where's their father?" he asked quietly, his voice scratchy with disuse. Clara didn't look up. "Dead," she replied. 3 years ago, mining collapse. They said it was his fault, said we owed them money for damages, came after us with papers and fists. She paused, eyes flickering toward Ben, who stirred in his sleep. "I ran," she continued, "from one town to another. Always someone asking questions, always someone who wanted something. I stopped trusting people a long time ago." Eli leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. The wind howled again, but it felt farther away now, like it had given up trying to shake the house apart. "You ever think about settling?" he asked. She laughed, soft, bitter. "With 4 mouths to feed, no name, no home, folks don't look kindly on women like me." Eli didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood up, grabbed a blanket, and draped it over the girl sleeping nearest the hearth. "I think," he said finally, "this place could use some noise." Clara didn't cry, but her shoulders trembled. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, things shifted. Slowly, like spring thaw, Eli cleared out the back room, gave it to the kids. Clara insisted on doing laundry, mending fence posts, even rethatching the chicken coop. Elsie started reading old books from Mary's shelf. Ben helped mend saddle straps. Matthew chased chickens until Eli built him a coop of his own. Baby Ruth learned to smile, and Eli learned to listen again, to laugh once or twice, to feel something other than the quiet. But nothing gold stays, not in the Wild West. One morning a rider came up the drive, dusty, tall, sharp-eyed. Clara saw him from the garden and froze. Eli stepped outside. The man dismounted. "Name's Barlow," he said. "Pinkerton agent. Looking for a woman by the name Clara James. She ran off with 4 kids and a debt of $500. Eli said nothing. "Have you seen her?" Barlow pressed. From behind the curtain, Clara watched, eyes wide, breath shallow like prey scenting blood. Eli spat into the dirt, leaned on his cane, and met the man's gaze. "Only woman here's my sister-in-law," he said coolly. "Widow Mercer. Been here near 5 years. Ain't got no kids." Barlow narrowed his eyes. "Mind if I look around?" "I do," Eli said, his voice like rusted iron. "This is private land." The agent stared him down a moment, then muttered and rode off. Clara collapsed onto the floor when it was over. Eli sat beside her, handed her water. "You lied for me," she said, voice trembling. "I protected my own," he replied. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she didn't flinch. She just nodded. "Then I'll stay, as long as you'll let me." He didn't answer, just stood and went back to fixing the fence, but he smiled. And as the sun set over the plains, lighting the horizon in soft gold, the wind no longer sounded like ghosts. It sounded like children laughing. By late spring, the hills surrounding Eli Mercer's ranch had turned a deep green, and for a time it seemed peace had finally staked its claim on that lonely stretch of Wyoming soil. Clara had settled into a rhythm born not of safety, but of habit. She awoke before dawn, swept the floors before the children stirred, and moved through each day with the grace of someone who expected it to vanish at any moment. Though Eli never asked questions, the way he glanced toward the road when a rider passed didn't escape her notice. He was watching for something too. The children flourished. Elsie began sketching flowers in a small notebook. Ben followed Eli like a shadow, learning about cattle and fences. Little Matthew discovered a gift for music, crafting a whistle from a hollow branch. And baby Ruth, now walking, had taken to leaving small, sticky handprints on every reachable surface in the house, each one a mark of life slowly returning. But the past, like a predator, never stops circling. It just waits for you to look away. That morning, Clara went into town. Eli offered to go himself. He rarely did, but he could see her shoulders tightening as the trip neared. Clara insisted, "We need flour, salt, and the girls are nearly out of shoes. I won't stay long." He nodded, but watched her ride out, his heart heavy in ways he couldn't name. It was her first time back in the town since she'd arrived months ago. People stared. They always did. A single woman in patched clothes, no man at her side, buying enough food for 5. It didn't take much for tongues to start wagging. She was just tying the last of her parcels to the saddle when the sheriff stepped out from his office. "Clara James." The name struck like a bullet. She turned slowly, every muscle taut. The sheriff, a tall, hawk-faced man named Colin Rusk, tipped his hat. "Got word from Cheyenne. Seems you've been hard to find. 500 in unpaid damages, 4 counts of child neglect, and," he glanced down at the paper in his hand, "suspicion of aiding a fugitive." The street went quiet. Clara's mouth opened, closed. Her hands were trembling. "It's not true," she said, her voice flat. "None of that is true." Rusk shrugged. "That's not for me to decide. Come along." He reached for her arm. She jerked away. "Don't touch me." People watched from storefronts and saloons. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. Clara had no choice but to mount up and ride beside the sheriff's horse, hands tied, fury boiling beneath her fear. Eli was in the north pasture when he heard the news. Marv Jensen rode out himself, face pale. They took her. Town says she's under arrest. Sheriff Rusk hauled her off like she was a rustler. Eli didn't speak, just turned back toward the barn, jaw clenched, and started saddling his horse. He hadn't ridden into town in 3 months, but now he rode like a man with purpose, each hoofbeat a thunderclap against the earth. The jailhouse was small, built more for drunks and brawlers than women with children. Clara sat on a bench, wrists red from the rope. Her eyes were glassy, but dry. She'd cried enough over the years. She wasn't going to give them that now. Rusk looked up when Eli entered. "She yours?" Eli looked him dead in the eye. "She's under my roof. That's all you need to know." "Well," Rusk said, with a slight smirk, "she's under mine now, until Cheyenne sorts her papers." Eli glanced at Clara. "You tell him?" She shook her head slowly. "Tell me what?" Rusk asked. Eli's jaw tightened. "That she was chased out of Silver Creek by 2 men who beat her half to death over money she never owed. That her husband died under company negligence, and they made her the scapegoat. That she ran not because she was guilty, but because they were coming after her kids." Rusk scoffed. "That's a story." Eli stepped closer. "You want proof? I got a letter from a priest in Silver Creek. I've read it. Said Clara showed up bruised, terrified, with 4 children and no food. He tried to shelter her, but the town turned. I can have it in your hand by tomorrow." "You gonna start defending every stray that walks onto your ranch?" Rusk growled. Eli didn't flinch. "Only the ones no one else will." There was a silence thick enough to taste. "I ain't releasing her without orders," Rusk said. Eli nodded once. "Then I'll wait." He sat outside the jailhouse all night. Word spread. By morning, a few townsfolk dropped by. The blacksmith's wife, the preacher, a woman Clara had once helped at the market. One by one, they left food, spoke up. "She helped my boy when he broke his leg. She paid for my bread when I came up short. She prayed over my husband's grave." By sundown, Rusk opened the cell. "She can go," he said gruffly, "but don't make me regret it." Back at the ranch, Clara didn't speak for a long time. She just stood in the yard, looking at the house, the laundry line, the place where Ruth had left a half-chewed biscuit on the step. She turned to Eli, her voice hollow. "I've been running so long, I don't know how to stop." Eli took off his hat. "Then maybe it's time someone helped you figure it out." She looked away, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. "I don't know what I am to you, Eli. A burden? A guest? An obligation?" Eli studied her face, weathered not by age, but by surviving. "You're someone who showed up when the world was quiet," he said, "and brought life back into it." She didn't respond. He walked to the porch, stood on the top step, then turned. "You and the kids need a home. I've got one that's too damn big and too damn quiet. You've done more work around here than any ranch hand ever did. You're no guest, Clara." She blinked, the wind tugging at her hair. "I ain't asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I reckon we could build something here, together, a place that doesn't run." And as the evening sun bathed the ranch in amber light, Clara looked up from her boots, eyes full, not of fear, but of the possibility of staying. "I thought I was looking for a place to hide," she whispered. Eli nodded slowly. "Turns out, you found a place to belong." The offer hung in the air like dust after a cattle stampede, suspended, stirring, impossible to ignore. Eli Mercer had never been a man of many words, and when he spoke, they landed with the weight of stone. But this time, they held something more than gravity. They held risk, vulnerability, and something Clara hadn't tasted in years: genuine kindness. "You and the kids need a home. I've got one." It echoed in her ears all night. She lay awake on the bunkhouse cot, Ruth curled against her chest, Matthew breathing slow at her feet, Elsie and Ben huddled in blankets nearby. The wind moaned outside, but it wasn't the wind that kept her restless. It was that voice in her chest whispering, "What if he means it?" She'd heard promises before, from priests, from bosses, even from the law. All of them came with strings, expectations she couldn't fulfill, or consequences she hadn't seen coming. But Eli hadn't asked her for anything. No deal, no bargain, just space, and quiet, and a future. By morning, her mind was made up. She found him in the pasture, feeding the calves. The sun was barely a blush on the horizon. "I'll stay," she said simply. He looked at her for a long second, nodded once, then went back to feeding. No celebration, no speech, just quiet acceptance, like he'd known she would say yes. But staying wasn't as simple as it sounded. Word got out fast. The townsfolk of Bartlett Hollow weren't fond of change, and certainly not fond of charity cases settling on land they didn't own. Rumors swirled like flies over sugar. She's a criminal, a liar, a woman with 4 illegitimate children. Some said she'd bewitched Eli. Others said she was hiding a man somewhere in the hills, waiting to rob the ranch. At first, Eli ignored them, but then they came for his contracts. The grain supplier refused to extend credit like usual. The blacksmith doubled his prices on tools. Even the church committee withdrew their offer for a new well, claiming budget constraints. Eli didn't say much, just paid in cash when he could, and went without when he couldn't. Clara saw it all, felt it like cold iron tightening around her ribs. One night after supper, she stood on the porch with her arms crossed, watching the stars. "I can leave," she said softly. "You don't have to carry the weight I bring." Eli, seated in the rocking chair beside her, didn't even look up. "You're not the weight, Clara," he said. "The weight is what folks refuse to unlearn." She didn't argue, just slid into the chair next to him and watched the stars burn quietly above their heads. Then came the letter. Sheriff Rusk delivered it himself, tight-lipped and stiff. A summons, not a warrant, but close. Clara was to appear at the county seat in Cheyenne to answer for the accusations leveled in Silver Creek: willful evasion of debt, child endangerment, and obstruction. Eli read the letter 3 times before speaking. "They can't just do this again," Clara whispered, holding Ruth close. "They can," he said grimly, "but this time you won't go alone." The journey to Cheyenne took 2 days. Clara rode in Eli's old wagon, children bundled in quilts, faces pressed to the canvas sides. Eli rode ahead on horseback, his rifle strapped across his back, not as a threat, but as a promise. No one would take them without a fight. The courthouse loomed gray and imposing under a sky thick with spring storms. Inside, the judge looked tired, the prosecutor disinterested, the room cold and full of murmurs. Clara stood straight, chin high, but her hands shook at her sides. Then Eli stepped forward. "I have a letter," he said, voice firm, "from Reverend Holcomb of Silver Creek. Outlines the abuse Clara faced, and confirms her husband's death was caused by unsafe mine conditions, conditions the company tried to bury." He handed over the letter. The judge read. Eyebrows raised. Murmurs grew louder. The prosecutor argued, of course, called the letter circumstantial, questioned Eli's relationship with Clara, implied things. Eli didn't flinch. "If being decent is cause for suspicion," he said, "then I reckon more of us should be guilty." The courtroom fell silent. Then the judge sighed, folded the letter, looked at Clara long and hard. "These are serious accusations," he said, "but so is running with 4 children through winter terrain without assistance. That you're all standing here alive is testimony to your will." He tapped the gavel once. Case dismissed, records cleared. Clara swayed where she stood, like her knees were trying to fold beneath her. Eli caught her elbow, steady and sure. "Let's go home," he said. Back at the ranch, things began to change. The blacksmith came by with a fresh horseshoe and an apology. The preacher stopped by with his wife and a pie. A few brave townsfolk dropped off extra wool or offered school books for the children. Clara didn't trust it at first. She watched every kindness like it might turn venomous. But slowly, day by day, things softened. And so did she. Elsie began attending the small schoolhouse on the far ridge. Ben started helping Eli with morning rounds. Matthew began playing a tune on his handmade whistle that Eli couldn't quite get out of his head. And Ruth learned to speak. Her first word was Mama. Her second was Eli. One afternoon, Clara found Eli in the garden. He'd never had one before her. Now rows of squash and turnips stood tall beneath the sun. "I was thinking," she said, hands in her apron, "about building a chicken coop behind the barn. Bigger, better, maybe even planting roses near the porch." He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Roses, huh? Fancy for a cattle ranch." She smiled. "This place deserves something beautiful." He nodded slowly. "So do you." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind brushing through the grass, the ranch alive with color and laughter that hadn't touched it in years. Then he said it, quiet, like he was testing the shape of the words in his mouth. "You ever think about making it official?" Clara blinked. "What?" He looked at her now, steady. "You, me, the kids. I ain't a man of big gestures, Clara, and I ain't got much to offer. But this land's got room. My heart's got more, if you want it." Her hands tightened around the apron strings. All her life, people had tried to own her, silence her, use her. She'd run so long she didn't remember what it felt like to stop. But here was a man who didn't want to possess her, just stand beside her. A man who didn't demand her past, but offered her a future. "Yes," she said, barely louder than a breath. Then again, stronger. "Yes, Eli Mercer, I do." And as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting the ranch in golden warmth, Clara stood with her new family, hand in hand with the man who had once lived in silence, and now stood beside her in a life they built not from perfection, but from courage. Because sometimes the West didn't just break people, sometimes it gave them back to themselves. The summer passed gently, like a long sigh after years of holding one's breath. Clara Mercer, once a woman hunted by shame, fear, and whispers, now moved through the ranch like she belonged there, not as a guest or a burden, but as part of its very bones. The house no longer echoed with silence. Instead, it carried the sound of laughter from the kitchen, the thud of tiny feet on wooden floors, and the soft hum of lullabies sung at dusk. Eli had always believed life ended the day he buried his daughter. For 9 years, he had wandered through his days like a ghost with a shovel, tending to cattle, patching fences, but never planting roots again. But something changed the day Clara stepped onto his land. With 4 children and a soul more exhausted than her voice could confess, she had not come seeking salvation. She had come because there was nowhere else to go. And yet, in that desolate place where the land met the horizon in a long line of solitude, something began to grow. There was no single moment where healing arrived like thunder or lightning. It came in pieces, small and slow. It came the first morning Clara laughed again, not politely, but openly, when Eli tried to cook bacon and nearly burned the pan to a crisp. It came when little Matthew clutched Eli's pant leg after a thunderstorm and called him Papa, without hesitation. It came when Ben, quiet and angry for so long, began carving a wooden horse for Ruth, sanding its edges with patient fingers. It came when Elsie, eyes wiser than her years, started reading aloud from Mary Mercer's old books, her voice filling the living room that had once been a tomb. These were not miracles in the grand sense. They were not loud or dazzling, but they were miracles nonetheless, quiet ones, the kind that come only when 2 broken lives decide to stop surviving and start living. The townsfolk changed too. It had not been easy. Some still looked at Clara with suspicion, murmuring stories passed through careless mouths. But those whispers grew fainter with time. They saw how she worked the land with bare hands and blistered palms. They saw how Eli stood by her, not in defense, but in partnership. They saw the children blossom, healthy and well-fed, with clean clothes and curious minds. When the autumn festival came, Clara brought 3 loaves of sweetbread to the community table. At first, no one touched them. Then, old widow Atkinson, who had once called Clara a harlot under her breath, took a slice and nodded slowly. "Could use a touch more cinnamon," she muttered, but took another bite. After that, others followed. By the end of the evening, all 3 loaves were gone. But healing does not mean forgetting. Sometimes, late at night, Clara would still wake in a cold sweat, heart pounding, the echo of hoofbeats in her ears. Eli never asked what haunted her. He would simply place a hand over hers, grounding her back to the present. Other nights, it was Eli who wandered outside beneath the stars, gripping the ghost of a whiskey bottle he no longer drank from. He would stare at the porch swing where his daughter once sat and wonder why the world had chosen to give him another chance. Neither spoke of those nights come morning, but both knew. Healing meant carrying the past, but no longer letting it drive. Then came the fire. It started in the east pasture. Dry lightning from a passing storm set the brush ablaze. Within minutes, flames were sweeping up the hill. The sky turned black. Smoke choked the air. Clara ran for the children, Eli for the horses. Neighbors came. Buckets formed a line from the creek, yelling, hooves pounding, fear so thick it cut like a knife. But in the chaos, something remarkable happened. Clara didn't crumble. She didn't freeze. She took command, her voice strong, giving orders, guiding people through smoke and confusion. Matthew, hold on to Elsie's hand. Ben, grab the water barrels near the shed. Ruth, Eli, I don't see Ruth. She's with me, Eli bellowed. The toddler clutched in his arms, face buried in his shirt. Together, they fought back the flames. By morning, the fire had been contained. The pasture was scorched, one shed lost. But the house stood, the barn intact, and every soul accounted for. The sun rose over blackened earth, and Eli looked at Clara, soot on her face, hair tangled, hands blistered, and realized something he hadn't dared admit until now. He loved her, not with the desperate longing of a younger man or the naive passion of first love, but with the hard-earned certainty of someone who had lost everything and been given a second chance. Weeks later, they rebuilt what had burned. Friends from town helped. Even Sheriff Rusk stopped by with a load of lumber and a grunt that might have passed for goodwill. Eli and Clara worked side by side, no longer strangers, no longer afraid. One afternoon, while planting new grass along the edge of the field, Clara paused. Sweat glistened on her brow. The children were laughing near the stream. "You know what I realized?" she asked. Eli looked up from his shovel. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life running. From debt, from danger, from who I used to be." She glanced at him. "But this place, this life, we've built something that doesn't erase the past, but makes peace with it." Eli nodded slowly. "You earned it, Clara." She smiled, and something behind that smile glowed, faint at first, then unmistakably bright. Hope. By the first snow, the family had a new rhythm. Elsie taught reading at the church on Sundays. Ben trained a wild colt and dreamed of entering the county fair. Matthew played his whistle for supper guests, and Ruth, tiny, fierce Ruth, insisted on feeding the chickens every morning, even in snow up to her knees. And Eli and Clara? They shared quiet mornings by the fire, shared glances across crowded rooms, shared hands in the dark when nightmares came. Their home was not perfect, but it was honest, a place stitched together not by wealth or status, but by choice, by love, by the grace of being seen and still being accepted. Because in the end, the Wild West wasn't just a place of dust and violence. It was a place of reinvention, a land of second chances. And for Clara and Eli Mercer, for 4 children once wrapped in fear and silence, it became something even rarer. A home, not built from wood or stone, but from courage, and from the simple, stubborn belief that broken things could grow again, even in the wildest places. Life doesn't always offer clean slates, but sometimes it gives us second chances wrapped in unexpected people. The story of Eli and Clara reminds us of something deeply human. Healing doesn't always come in grand moments. It comes in quiet choices, in small acts of kindness, in the decision to believe that someone is more than their past. Many of us, especially those of us past 50, carry old wounds. We've lost people. We've made mistakes. We've been misunderstood. And sometimes we retreat into silence, thinking our best days are behind us. But just like Eli's lonely ranch came back to life with the arrival of Clara and her children, our lives can find new purpose when we open the door to compassion, even when it feels risky. This story isn't just about survival. It's about the courage to trust again, to forgive, to rebuild, and to realize that it's never too late to choose love, to defend what's right, or to create a home, not just out of walls, but out of loyalty and heart. So if this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of a time you stood up for someone, or maybe a time you needed someone to believe in you, know this: you're not alone. The Wild West wasn't just about guns and grit. It was about redemption, mercy, and the strength to begin again. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful Wild West stories like this. Tales that speak to the soul, stir the heart, and remind us all that no matter our age, there's still a road ahead worth riding.